Welcome to the Wellness Growth Show, where successful wellness entrepreneurs share their journey, strategies, and insights for building impactful businesses. I'm your host, Scott Schumann, and each week we bring you conversations with industry leaders, transforming their communities through innovative approaches to health and wellness. Today, we're sitting down with Darren, founder of Melbourne, TMJ, and Facial Pain Center, who will share his experience. Welcome, Darren.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
Excellent, excellent. Can you share a bit about your journey to TMJ and facial pain in your practice?
Sure. Well, first of all, for your listeners, my accent is South African, not Australian, even though I live in Australia. So my professional journey started when I qualified as a physiotherapist in Johannesburg in October 93. So that's a long time ago. And I was very fortunate in my first role, which lasted 3 years. I worked for one of South Africa's most celebrated physiotherapists, and even back in those days, she was treating people with TMJ, which stands for temporomandibular joint or jaw joint. She was treating people with jaw-related issues. And so when I arrived in Australia 3 years later, I was under the impression that everybody treated jaws because they were just another part of the human body. But I was quite surprised to find that in Melbourne at that time, there were very few people who were putting their hands up and wanting to take care of these conditions that can be quite tricky. So I continued my professional development as physiotherapists are obliged to do to keep our registration, and I continued to be drawn to courses that seem to have a head neck focus. Eventually, I felt like I had quite a lot to offer and would get success with the occasional patient that would see, that we treat this condition as one of a list of maybe 30 other things on the menu. And I decided that I felt like there was more to offer these people. I wasn't being found. And when I tried to promote myself and my interest to would-be referrers, being dentists and medical practitioners, I wasn't really met with a lot of success. The people would just pay me lip service, excuse the pun, and I would never see the patients. So I reached a stage where I was thinking quite deeply on this and decided that if I truly want to service what I believe are a very neglected group of people, because these conditions are not well managed in the main, then I really need to be focusing on them as a specific group. And I needed to brand my business in such a way that people would take more notice of me. And so I decided that a good name would be Melbourne TMJ and Facial Pain Center. And it had an immediate effect.
Okay. So, and tell me about were you offering multiple services still at this time, or did you end up transitioning a little bit later with that?
No, so it was a slow process. The first thought that I had after registering the business name was, shit, I've put stuff down in the name and I've got a business card and a website. I probably need to live up to that name now and learn a lot more about stuff that maybe I don't know about. And I had to go on a journey of discovery to really try and see things through the lens of how dentists were managing these conditions, because they were the people tasked with managing jaw-related complaints. And that's one of the reasons that I feel that it's been poorly managed, is because dentists are great at being dentists, but they're not trained to treat what is essentially a musculoskeletal problem. When people are suffering temporomandibular disorders, which is just an umbrella term for the many different presentations that we see, at the end of the day, it's the overuse of the jaw joints and muscles and the head neck muscles and joints that actually results in an episode of pain or stiffness or dysfunction. And that's just not the scope of practice or the lens through which a dentist views these patients. They're looking at clenching, grinding, and needing to protect the teeth with, specialized occlusal splints, and they're not really, in some cases, even interested in treating pain. So I needed to understand how they viewed things and learned their language and their lingo. And there's actually a funny story. Is shortly after deciding to do this work and getting really involved in my own learning, I was invited by a dentist to attend a course run by a very well-known physiotherapist from Chile, who's considered the grandfather of physiotherapy for temporomandibular disorders. His name is Mariano Roccabado, and his condition for attending his course was if you were a dentist, you had to come with a physiotherapist, chiropractor, or osteopath, because he didn't believe that you could treat these conditions purely from a dental perspective. And I asked him a question in the course, and he said to me, Darren, it's clear from the language you use that you must be a dentist. And I laughed and I said, well, actually, I'm a physiotherapist, but I've learned how to speak the dental lingo because it's important in order to be able to have that conversation with dentists and for them to understand how I understand their perspective, but they need to be working collaboratively with me because we bring things to the table that they can't. So that was how things started initially. And then I had a dental colleague who had actually referred his sister to me for treatment and was impressed with the results. And then he relocated interstate. But when he returned a few years later, he contacted me and he said, we have to work collaboratively. I need to be part of your practice. And it was a big decision because we had referring dentists into the clinic and we needed to make sure that we weren't going to be burning those relationships. So we had to be very careful about how we implemented his involvement and only had that involvement where there was no conflict of interest or at the express request of a referring dentist. So that was when my practice became multidisciplinary for these conditions. And since then, as we've learned more and more about the complexity and the many moving parts of this condition, so we've incorporated other into the multidisciplinary offering of the clinic. So we now have a GP who specializes in the use of botulinum or Botox, as it's called, which is supplementary. It's not the be all and end all of treatment because it really is playing a very limited adjunctive role, but it does have a place. And we've also got a orofacial myofunctional therapist, which I know is a mouthful, but that's essentially somebody who comes from the dental world, who knows how to look for the dysfunctions and knows how to rehabilitate a lot of the muscular movement, particularly in relation to breathing. And she's also a breathing educator, functional breathing educator. So we understand how essential good, healthy breathing patterns are for managing pain and for the effects that they have positively on the nervous system to try and bring a state of calm. So we have that aspect as well in the practice. So it's been a journey and it's constantly evolving.
Okay. Are you so at what point did you say, wow, I'm doing all these things and like I'm offering these services and these services. Like how did you kind of cope with the change with
Yeah. Well, what ended up happening if we backpedal a little bit to a few years ago already now, where I had the dental side, but I didn't have the other services. The more successful the practice became, the bigger my case list became, and it got to the stage where I was consulting literally 60 hours a week. So I was consistently seeing between 90 and 100 half-hour consults a week, with a few breaks for lunch and stuff like that thrown in.
Wow.
And I wasn't coping. I was taking only a 2-week annual holiday, which I know that's maybe normal for the US, but here in Australia, we have 20 days of annual holiday if you're employed. And I was also working almost every single public holiday with the exception of a few. And I was the sole breadwinner for my family. My wife has worked in the clinic with me, more on the administrative side, but we were one source of income. So I was putting 2 kids through private schooling and trying to pay a mortgage. And so on the one hand, I was really happy that the business was flourishing. But on the other hand, this thought was looming that, I'm turning 50 in 18 months' time. This was back in January 2018. I don't know if I can do this for another 50 weeks. This was when I came back from my 2-week annual vacation.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do this for 50 weeks at this pace, before the next 2-week break. And I was feeling pretty close to burnout, and I just knew that it wasn't sustainable. So I had to make some pretty big decisions, and I was very fortunate that I was put in touch through a sequence of fortuitous events. I was put in touch with an amazing organization whose sole purpose is to help people in the allied health industry to run smarter practices where they're more systematic, they're more leveraged, and ultimately give people the way forwards to um, dial back their clinical consulting, and to use the term that we use in Australia, which comes out of the trades industry, we say coming off the tools. So where we're no longer the caregiver as the healthcare practitioner. But that itself was an amazing journey filled with ups and downs and challenges. But yeah, that's really what it resulted in, to the point that 20 months later I stopped consulting completely.
And how have your experiences like sort of influenced your approach to the business and the patient care?
Well, in order to actually replace myself, I needed to ensure that whoever I was going to put in my place as the caregiver or the physiotherapist, that I was creating somebody that had enough skills and that I felt confident in to step into that role and still be able to deliver a high quality service with good clinical outcomes. And that was a process. I had done a lot of self-development and personal, professional development. So I had a good skill set, and my brain is one that likes things to be very ordered and structured anyway. So it was a case of creating a training program and process, followed by a mentoring process that enabled me to bring on the first team member specifically to be trained up to become a mini me, right?
Okay.
So that we could transfer trust to our referral base, to know that irrespective of who saw their patient, they'd be well cared for, and they'd be well cared for in a way that's consistent with the way I was doing it. And that actually led me to eventually name my approach, right? So that we can say that people in the practice are trained by Darren in his approach, the Gorelsky craniomandibular method. And so we self-certify every new practitioner. We invest a significant amount of time into their training, and then ongoing mentoring and support, in order for them to stay very current with changes in the industry and new advancements. So we're constantly learning. We have a attitude of being lifelong learners, and my role has switched from being a consultant to patients to being a consultant to my team. But it was a process, and the roadmap for that process was heavily influenced by my mentor and mentors through this academy, all of whom actually come from an allied health background. They're all people that are practitioners that ran their own businesses or still do, but have achieved the ability to step out of the consulting role and be able to focus on being visionary, being strategic, and setting up all the nuts and bolts that allied health practices need, just the same as every other business needs.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we're just not taught that when we go to university. We're taught to be physiotherapists, not how to run businesses or manage teams, or enhance culture or anything like that. So it's been a learning journey, and the support has come from being part of this amazing organization.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, to be able to connect with mentors that have actually lived through the pain and struggles and kind of come up with a way, it's like, how do we fix this? How do we make this better? How do we run our businesses better? That's amazing. What advice would you give someone considering maybe a similar career transition, even doing similar to what you're doing? What would you say to them?
Yeah. So I think the my saving grace in this whole process has been the fact that I've had passion for a specific niche, because it's allowed me to really hyper focus and to dig really deep in my knowledge and understanding of this condition. I had to give myself permission to not read every article that came across my desk about the human body. Because if you're somebody treating the body, then you feel the sense of responsibility to know everything about everything. And I got to that stage where, with 26 years of consulting, I think I was pretty solid already that if a knee or an ankle injury came through the door, I was able to treat it comprehensively without needing to be the absolute expert in that area. But it allowed me to focus all my professional development in one direction, which then enabled me to become much more specialized in my understanding and in my skill set. So I think finding that niche is the first thing that I would recommend to people. The other thing that I would say to people is, if they meet with success, and hopefully they will, because that's why they're doing it, they need to know how to bottle their approach so that they can create that leverage and eventually have a way to replace their own physical exertion, even if it's when they're ready to retire, right? It doesn't have to be because they want to do what I did. I mean, some people will want to continue because they just absolutely love the gratification of being able to help people and they don't want to give that up. My advice would be, get your business or your practice to a stage where it does not rely on you personally to generate a single dollar, and then you consult for the love of it, not for the need. And that's a distinction that I think people need to make, is they're doing it for the right reasons and not get to a stage where they start to resent the fact that they're still consulting, because I think it makes for a less effective clinical experience for the patient. The other thing, a big realization that I had, and a real mindset change that I needed to arrive at, was my sense of self-worth. It was very, very tied up and linked to how many patients I could help in a week, because that's why I chose to be a physiotherapist. And when I made the decision, the hard decision, to start cutting that back, initially I thought that I would cut back from 60 hours to 30 hours of consulting and 30 hours of practice management. But that was just foolish thinking. When I started to cut back my consulting hours and realized there was actually life outside the consulting room, I decided that 60 hours was probably as much of a problem as the number of people that I was treating in that time. So it's just not a normal volume of hours for people to be able to sustain year in and year out. When I started to cut back on the hours, and then got to a situation where I thought, actually, I think I'm better off if I don't see patients, because that's going to free up my headspace to be able to more single-mindedly focus on all the other things that my business needs, including, of course, the training and mentoring. I started to feel some anxiety around the fact that I wasn't, number one, I was being financially irresponsible because I'd been income generating all that time. And if I wasn't seeing patients, I wasn't effectively generating income. But also, was I going to not be true to myself as a physiotherapist? If I got such a kick out of helping people, where was I going to get that sense of self-worth from if it wasn't from being a physiotherapist? And I remember having to really change my thinking around, I've still got there's still a lot that I'm bringing to the table, and if it's not directly to the patients, they will ultimately benefit if I run a better practice, and I have very well trained therapists who are able to service them almost as well as I was able to, and probably now better than I was. Um, and yeah, so it was a mindset change. And I remember putting a sign on my desk that said, I no longer get paid by the hour. I get paid by the value that I bring to the hour. And I try and hold myself accountable to that each day. Before I leave at the end of the day, I try and reflect on what value did I bring? What did I actually achieve today? Sometimes the answer is, oh, you had a slack day today. It was all coffee shop meetings and conversations. But in actual fact, all of those things still add a lot of value, because those are the opportunities that sometimes lead to you collaborating with other businesses, or thinking about introducing other services, or even just how can I make the workday more efficient for my therapists. We've started to explore whether there is a role for introducing things like AI into our note taking. So you need to create that space for yourself, but it only comes if you are willing to give yourself that opportunity. So yeah, a big mindset change is probably something that everyone who's contemplating this is going to need to go through. And for some people, it'll be easier than others.
I can imagine just, you're so focused on one thing and you think that that's the right thing, and you're helping your patients, and being able to, realize, like, if I can just save 2 hours even a week and do a different activity where you're working on the business and the things that you mentioned, you're still helping people. You're still adding that value, and you're still wanting to make the business better and be able to serve better. And but a lot of times I think, talking to people, is they do get kind of trapped where they're just go 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 with patients, and then there's so little time to actually look at the business and go, how do I, make better
Yeah.
processes and stuff.
Well, I'm proof that I was the bottleneck in my own business, and that's there just was no headspace, and there was no time for me to actually zoom out and go, this is crazy. This needs to be updated. We can do things so much better, or we're not doing a great job at this, and we really need to strategize how we can change, and do need to change things if we want to stay competitive. And at the end of the day, if I fall over in a heap, then everybody that I employ, this is assuming that I'm still the caregiver in that sense. Um, it is. I'm not going to be able to even have a business that's able to then service people. So the fact that it doesn't rely on me nearly as much now, and it's a much healthier business that can continue to grow beyond me. So yeah, I think that realization of, I'm really not doing myself or my patients any long-term benefit if I burn out. And luckily I managed to catch myself just in time.
It's a good thing. Yes. So in terms of making that transition and realizing, like, I do need to hire a key player to that you can train up and kind of take over, or not take over, but just, take some of those responsibilities off your plate so you can focus on other things in the business. What are some maybe key qualities that you look for when you're recruiting?
So before I talk about qualities, I want to say one of the things that I think was important. I had other people on my team when I was already on this journey. Before I decided to come off the tools, I had other people that were working, and commonly in Australia, I don't know what it's like in the US, but it's quite common for people to just be contractors, and they get a percentage of the fee, of the consult fee. But essentially, if they got no patients booked in the diary, then that they don't have to be at work, because they're not earning any money from sitting around. And when I joined this academy, everybody that they were coaching had transitioned from that model to an employment model where people were actually employees, and needed to be at work for their 38-hour week. And that's with a bonus kind of structure on top of that. So the busier people are, the more they will earn. But the fact that they were employees, and that they were expected to be here and be involved in activities, because that was what was in the position description, was a game changer. So I think that is something that's definitely been favorable for us, because I could then set expectations, which I could never set when somebody was saying, you can't tell me what to do. If I'm not treating a patient, I'm not earning any money. Why should I do anything extra? Whereas if they're employed, it's actually, well, you're employed to be here. You're earning X dollars per hour to be here. Therefore, I expect you to be here. I'd expect you to be here on time. I expect you to be here, because what happens if there's a walk-in patient? Where do we put them if you have gone off and, you're not here anymore because your diary was empty? So that's the first thing that I would recommend people consider. The other thing is, for me, it's very much about culture. I think the number one criteria for me when people are applying is to make sure that we have somebody who's a good cultural fit, somebody who wants to be on the journey with us, wants to become one of us, is teachable, because the unique skill set that we've developed is not something that people learn in their base degrees as physiotherapists, or my team now includes osteopaths as well, because I struggled to find physiotherapists that were interested in our niche. And the osteopaths are just another pool of very well trained manual therapists, is the term we use. And I thought to myself, if I'm training people and assuming a zero knowledge base, then what's the difference if I train a physiotherapist who's registered and qualified, or if I train an osteopath who's registered and qualified? And so my team, my TMJ therapy team, now has both of those differently trained professionals, but all wearing the same T-shirt and all called TMJ therapists trained in our approach. So for me, it wasn't the skills that were as important as the attitude and the willingness to be on the journey with us, because I don't want to fight with people to do things our way. They're not a good cultural fit for us. If they want to do things completely different, then they need to be in an environment where they can thrive. And I had one such occasion where no matter what I suggested and wanted to implement in the practice, I employed a physiotherapist who was, similarly qualified in terms of number of years, so super experienced person. But we were on just completely different trajectories. And I remember having a conversation with her one day with the intention of letting her go. And I just said to her, nothing we're going to talk about now is about your dedication to your patients or your level of skill. That's completely, it's just I accept that you are an excellent practitioner and that you are very dedicated and caring for your patients. It's about style. And I said, I've tried what I can to try and, bridge these gaps between how I want to run things and how you want to run things, or how you're prepared to run things. And I said, and I just feel like the gap is too large. And I said, we've both reached the position in our careers where we deserve to be excited about going to work every day, right? We've done the hard yards. We need to be in those years now where we just love what we're doing because it's what we choose to do. And I said, and clearly you're not loving the way I do things, and that's fine. That's your prerogative. But there's nothing more that I can do to satisfy your requests, or your tripping over my words here, but trying to find a way to do things that is going to be comfortable for you so that you love it the way I love it. And so we just agreed that we were better off apart than together. And it was a very happy and successful ending to my employment of this person. And they're off somewhere else, and I'm sure that they're thriving because they can follow a style that suits them. So I think attitude and culture is probably the central thing that I put through my lens when I recruit. And I've actually started to now, before even offering an interview to somebody, I've started to have what I call an alignment call, preferably through Zoom, but I have some very specific things that I want to know from them. And in some cases, we both recognized that what they thought they were applying for and how they presented to me as candidates on a CV were not really aligned. And so it's been a good addition to my process. It saved both of us a lot of time and headaches. So something else that I think is valuable.
So it's kind of just a series of questions that help you to really understand more about what they're about. And
And what they're looking for.
yeah, because you want obviously you want to hire someone, you want them to be happy with accepting what they're going to be doing, but also that you are, you're going to be offering this training, and you've got these specific ways that work really well, and that's the mission. And so are you
Yeah.
on board? Are you on board with that? Or are you coming in going, I've got my ways, this is how I've been doing it, and I'm not teachable. So kind of
Yeah,
thing.
correct. And one of the things which is a really unfortunate trend, certainly in Australia, and it's not a new trend, but it's just getting worse, is that the universities are teaching physiotherapists, and I'm hearing now, unfortunately, osteopaths as well to a less extent, that manual therapy or hands-on treatment is not evidence-based, which is the biggest garbage. So these therapists, these young therapists are being trained in at the universities. They're obviously learning a lot about pain education and about treating people in a biopsychosocial approach, and that exercise is super important and rehabilitation, all of which are essential. But at the end of the day, if you're a physiotherapist or in America, physical therapist, your mode of treatment is your hands. And we get the results we do because people walk in pain and they leave a session feeling less painful. We can give them an immediate sense of relief. In fact, our tagline is rapid relief and lasting results. We can only achieve that if we do what we know we need to do. And if I'm interviewing somebody who has been, I'm going to use the word contentiously, but poisoned to believe that manual therapy or hands-on therapy is got no role to play and is not evidence-based, we're just not a good fit for each other. And it's one of the first questions that I ask is, what do you think about manual therapy? What are your views? How much of it do you incorporate in your treatment if they have got some years under their belt? And that will immediately be a disqualifier for me if I can see that this person is not in alignment with that thinking.
So after you've gone to the interview and it sounds like a good fit, and you bring them on and stuff, what are this will probably be the last question, but what are some ways that you try to continue even building the strong team culture?
Is this after they're on the team?
Yeah, you've already hired them. I mean, because you mentioned just the big one is trying to hire the right person and having
Yeah.
this, going through this interview process that you have, and then now
Yeah.
that they're on board, and whether it's, they're 3 months, 6 months, even further down the road, how do you kind of continuous find ways to build a strong team culture?
Yeah. Well, my leadership style is very collaborative, and I try not to have people here, including myself, with egos. So there are no egos on our team. We all recognize that we have some people that are new graduates and some people that have been therapists for as long as I have, for 30 years. Everyone's got something to add, and everybody's opinion is valuable. We meet weekly as a team, which I think is super important. So we have an alternating, on a Monday, we have an alternating either a team meeting where we just talk about processes and things that are going on that they need to be updated about, or concerns that they have, or question or ideas that they have. And then the alternate Monday is a 1 hour case studies where we talk about tricky cases, and we have our clinical lead who's been with me since he was a new graduate, and he's really progressed amazingly and gone on to do a master's in orofacial pain. And so from a skills and a knowledge perspective, he's probably the most qualified on the team.
Okay.
He facilitates our professional development, where either he'll allocate 3 people and say, can you present an interesting case to the rest of the team so we can learn from that case, or we can discuss it if it's difficult. And then we also use those sessions to invite guest speakers to us. So for example, not last Monday, the Monday before, we had a lady come in. She's a psychologist and she specializes in treating sleep related issues. So a sleep psychologist with her method is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So we're constantly learning, and I feel like my role has been to ensure that the team feel like they are on that learning journey. And I think that breeds a good culture because they recognize that in many cases in the interview process with some of the people I've recently hired, and I've said, why are you applying for this role? And one of the big things that comes up all the time is, like, I'm happy doing the work where I am, but I don't feel I'm growing. I don't feel like I'm learning. I don't feel like I'm being supported or mentored. And so, in addition to what I've just described, every team member gets a personal one-on-one mentor session every week. So again, it just adds to that culture
That's
of,
huge.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
hear about that.
In fact, my team members, I think they're on a good wicket for their 38-hour weeks that they are employed. They're only client facing for about 31 or 32 hours a week. The
Okay.
rest of that time is time in their diary blocked out for them to stay on top of their reports, on their case notes, to have their mentoring, attend the team meetings, etc.
So it's all
So
into the
it's
38.
a good split for them. So again, that adds to the culture of them feeling that we recognize that they need some sort of balance, and we obviously do our best to try and accommodate that.
Sure, versus like if you were working 50 hours and then you're like wanting to add on those extra things, like who's going to want to be putting in the 60 to get, you're probably exhausted to even have a mentor, even though it's a good thing, but it's like, but you've actually built it in to the, what is it, 7 hours, right? From the 31 to 38 kind of thing. So
Yeah.
amazing. Kudos. Okay. Well, thank you, Darren, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. Tell people how they can connect with you, either your website or social handles.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I am passionate about my niche and about the journey that I've been on, and always happy to share these insights so that others going through maybe similar thinking processes or feel that they're stuck know that they're not. They're things that they can and should do to try and create their ideal week, but they do need help, and that the role of a mentor is, it's fundamental. And I'm meeting with mine tomorrow morning.
There you go.
So in order to contact me, they can either just send me an email directly to my email address, which is Darron, Darron, at Melbourne, Centre, centre.com.au, or they could hop onto our website, which is melbournetmjcentre.com.au. I also have a LinkedIn profile that people can connect through. So yeah, I'm happy to connect with anyone who's got questions or wants to just say hello.
Sounds good. Okay. Thank you all for joining us on the Wellness Growth Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the Wellness Growth Show on Spotify and share it with other wellness professionals in your network. Until next time, keep growing and transforming lives through wellness.